motels or limited service hotels. You've probably seen these buildings throughout the US. I decided to dive into the motel business to find out what's the draw, is it hard to get started, what kind of weird stuff do you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, and most importantly, is this a business worth looking into? In my new monthly series that I'm tentatively calling Owners Explain, where I talk to the folks who are behind these businesses to get the inside scoop. Now, I can't promise we'll cover everything in just 15 minutes, but I want to give you a concise summary to help you decide if this is worth exploring further. And if you'd like to join me on this learning journey, make sure to hit the subscribe button. First up, why might motels be a good idea? The biggest thing seems to be cash flow. For example, a $5 million new construction motel can bring in about $1.2 million in revenue. Sure, there are also expenses to account for, but if you've done your market research and you've picked the right location in the right market, this can be quite lucrative. Additionally, some motels come with an apartment unit behind the office, and it's kind of like the ultimate live-work situation. You need a place to stay anyway, so why not just live in the place that you work? And then lastly is appreciation. There's the component of this building appreciating over time as the whole town or city expands and appreciates, but there's also this other layer of business valuation. The more profitable the motel, the more you can then sell it for, and profitability by and large is something you can control. Now you may be thinking, if someone had the money, why would they buy like 5 motels instead of say one fancy Ritz-Carlton, right? I had this question too, and the answer seems to mainly be cash flow. A lot of these Motel 6s, Super 8s are actually better cash flowing businesses relative to the amount that you are putting in. The other thing is that these 5-star full service nice hotels may even be just a whole other business model because they have the restaurant component, the spa component, the event space component. So there are many different revenue streams beyond just selling a bunch of rooms, which obviously gets a little more complex. From an expense perspective, it's just much simpler to control your costs when you don't have a bazillion offerings like a nice gym, a pool, a spa, a restaurant, and another restaurant. Motels are mainly just a place to sleep, and sometimes that's all people need. So who are these people who own motels and how did they get started? A lot of the folks I talked to actually started not as the owner of a motel. For example, they've served in housekeeping roles as the manager of a motel or as like the hands-on sweat equity partner to someone else who was more experienced. And then as time went on, they built up experience and capital and eventually went out on their own to get their own motel. The price of a motel can really vary from something like $200,000 in a more rural, smaller town, a smaller motel, to several million dollars. And I know what you're thinking. Are you telling me that a housekeeper can somehow save enough money to then go buy their own motel? Good question. Yes and no. A lot of people go into such a purchase with partners. Some of these partners would be just passive investor contributing just capital, while others are more actively managing and taking a role in the day-to-day operations. And I suppose if you have enough partners, enough people putting money into the pot, eventually you do raise enough money to then buy a motel. All right, so how do you find a motel for sale and how do you buy it? One method is to go online to places like LoopNet and look around for what's for sale. Alternatively, you can find out a lot of information from the owners themselves. Even if the owner is not interested in selling like right at that moment, they can at least keep you in mind, or they can connect you with some of the other motel owners in the area because chances are they are all in kind of the same network. I know the ones I talk to, like their kids all know each other, they all hang out. It's like a whole thing. Now, how do you decide if a motel is profitable? From what these owners told me, location is super important, and then market demand and supply would be the next thing to look at. How much are the rooms being rented for? What's the occupancy rate like? What's the competition, etc.? It's actually not unlike an Airbnb if you've come from my other videos. And then are there other revenue streams beyond just selling the rooms for motels? Sometimes you could be charging for breakfast, or if there are other services you are selling. And then lastly, what are the expenses? For the financing aspect, if you have like a motel in mind and you want to buy it, in addition to having partners, there are 2 main routes. First is a commercial loan through a bank. With this option, the owners seem to be like really leveraging their relationship with the bank from previous loans and partnerships. Having a good track record of previous businesses and a good business plan are helpful for getting better terms. So as someone who is completely new to this, it would probably be smart for me to then partner up with someone who already has established a relationship with the bank or has basically a nice CV to show the bank that yes, we know what we're doing. Unlike the classic 30-year house mortgage that have a fixed payment for the whole time, commercial loans usually have a shorter duration of time where the payment is fixed, and then like after 5 years or so, you may have to refinance if you're not selling the property. And that of course exposes you to risks with changes in interest rates. The second option is an SBA loan, which I guess is still technically through a bank, but now the government is involved. The interest rate on these loans can be more favorable because essentially the government is guaranteeing to the bank that they will back you, which reduces the risk to the lender, aka the bank. But the downside is that the application may take longer and there may be stipulations when you sell. But on the flip side, when COVID hit, the SBA loans could be deferred for a couple of years, and that was really beneficial for cash flow. So in the previous example of the $5 million new construction, a whole bunch of partners came together to put in 20% down roughly, and then the remaining $4 million were partly financed through an SBA loan and then partly through a commercial loan. Now let's talk about what goes into running a motel, both in terms of time and expenses. If you came from my other Airbnb videos, there are actually quite a few similarities in terms of the kinds of expenses and the tasks you have to do, just on a larger scale, which presents some opportunities for more efficient use of your staff and time. However, there were also some additional resources that I would not have thought of. So there's housekeeping, obviously, and this can be cheaper than Airbnb flips because you have in-house cleaning staff and you can pay them an hourly rate instead of pay a professional cleaning company. One thing to keep in mind is that a lot of the flips can end up happening within a short time window, especially if it's like a really busy weekend, if there's a specific event in town and all the guests are basically checking in and checking out on that same day. It can get kind of insane to try to flip 100 rooms within a short period of time, and some owners actually end up getting involved with the cleaning and the flipping when they were short-staffed. Laundry, that should probably be its own category. Just think of the sheer number of linens you have to do in like a 100-room hotel. There's also maintenance, like a faucet could be broken in this room and then the next day a toilet would be clogged in this other room. And from the folks we talked to, it seems like there's at least one maintenance thing to do every single day. Next, we have supplies, like cleaning supplies, but also the supplies to stock the rooms with, like shampoos, toilet paper, and whatnot. They also keep extra, say, faucets on hand because when you have this many rooms, things can break and you can't be out buying like a single faucet every single time. So some thought has to go into what kind of stuff do you need to keep in stock, what kind of inventory do you need to keep, where does it all get stored, and who is managing that purchasing process. And then if there's a breakfast service, who buys that stuff, who puts it out, who clears it away, etc. There's front desk staff who also sometimes multitask and do other things within the motel. And then a lot of places also have a general manager that is separate from the owner. I have heard from a few different owners that in general, it's been really hard to hire and retain quality staff. And so some of these owners end up stepping in as general manager, taking over the day-to-day operations, training new hires, dealing with guest complaints, which ends up taking a lot of time, and it may not be something that they want to do long term. So if you're thinking of investing in a motel but not wanting to be entangled into the day-to-day stuff, the local labor market / having a really legit manager would be really important. But I guess on the flip side, if you're looking to gain some experience while you're building up capital and looking for an opportunity to learn more about the business, I know there are many owners that would be absolutely thrilled to have someone who is dependable, quick learner, who can step into the manager role and take things off their plates. So anyway, collectively, staff wages and benefits take up a pretty big chunk of their expenses. Other pretty standard and predictable expenses include utilities, taxes, which could be property taxes, tourist taxes, sales taxes, your loan payments and insurance, legal and accounting expenses, and whatever business licenses you need to be operating this motel in the first place. There's some level of advertising and marketing depending on if you already belong to a franchise, if it is a new motel, that can vary. And then platform fees. So you know how Airbnb charge hosts a 3% host service fee. Motels also go through online travel agencies or OTAs for their bookings, and places like Booking.com and Expedia charge a whopping 18% for platform fees. On top of that, you also have franchise fees if you are part of a hotel franchise. So if you have a Courtyard, that's part of Marriott. If you have Days Inn, that's part of Wyndham and Marriott and Hilton, like all of those hotel chains would take another chunk out from your earnings. And it sounds like roughly this is in the 10% range. And occasionally it could be lower if you can negotiate a contract with a smaller hotel chain that may be looking to expand their footprint and giving you a low introductory franchise fee that is much less than what you would expect. And then over a few years, they would start increasing that, something like that. And it would vary based on the contract. And then obviously there's also the credit card processing fees. And then this last one is one I would not have thought of, and that is renovations. If you're a part of a hotel chain, it is actually required in the contract to do renovations every 5 to 6 years, whatever that language in the contract says. And so at that 5-year mark, for example, you would have to get all new furniture, regardless of the condition of your existing furniture. And the entire cost of purchasing the new supplies and hauling away the old stuff, that would be on the motel owner. This renovation requirement also kicks in sometimes when you're just taking over a new motel. So even if, say, the previous motel owner already did the whole thing 2 years ago, you as the new owner might have to redo it just as part of the hotel franchise takeover process. All of these franchise-related expenses kind of begs the question of why not just have your own brand? And I feel like I didn't get a straight answer on this one. The main barrier that I'm hearing is the ability to get a bank loan. For one, the valuation of, say, like a new Holiday Inn Express might be a little more straightforward when you can compare it to, say, like a Days Inn from across the street and use how much they're making in your own projections. The second part might be that the franchise also lends some credibility to you as the business owner seeking a loan in terms of having viable operations and the right softwares and marketing support. But then again, if you already have a relationship with a bank, you have shown that you have done previous motels and they were successful, and you can look up projected average daily rates, the occupancy in the area, kind of like how you would look it up for an Airbnb. Couldn't you just have a really good business plan and a marketing plan? None of the folks that I talked to did motels and Airbnb, so I do wonder if their perspective of the perceived barriers are just about having like the right property management software or like syncing calendars or dynamic pricing tools, which in my mind are not easy, but the tools exist and it's still fairly straightforward. I suppose the other benefit of having a franchise is the brand recognition and brand loyalty, because people know what to expect and they may feel more comfortable using a motel with a recognizable name. There was one motel owner who operates their own thing that's not under a franchise. Over the years, they've really built up a presence in the area, and financially at this point, it's pretty much a cash cow. They get to bypass a lot of the franchise expenses, both in the franchise fees itself, but also the franchise mandated renovation process. And marketing is no longer really a concern because they already have a consumer base, they are already established, they have reviews and whatnot. The only downside that they mention is that they are a little bit more susceptible to receiving a variable pool of guests, including folks who may not be able to put a credit card for incidentals like other hotels would require, which a lot of times means nothing, but it's just a slightly different list of pros and cons to consider. If you have more insight on the franchise versus set up your own thing, or if you are a current motel owner, comment below and drop some knowledge. We'd love to hear more perspective from someone who has done this before. All right, lastly, am I going to get into the motel business? I think I am open to the idea, and one easy way is just to be a passive investor. I'm very lucky to already have a bunch of connections, but even if you don't, I know there are hotel-based REITs or REITs that you can potentially look into if you're interested. Not financial advice, do your own research. But anyway, back to motels. To take a more active role though, I would need to learn a little bit more about different markets, about analyzing deals, how like very broadly the different different components of hospitality businesses fit together in a very macro sense. And I also want to think a little bit more about like the motel business, the Airbnb stuff, and wouldn't it be nice to have something in between, like a little boutique hotel that is also event space, still keeping a lot of that uniqueness and fun that makes an Airbnb fun. But now you get to take advantage of the efficiencies of running a group of rooms together, like the cleaning, management, and marketing. If I do go down that path, I will also want to make sure to study how to build systems that would prevent me from being sucked into the day-to-day in-person operational tasks. Oh, and PS, if you are thinking of hosting on Airbnb, I do have a playlist that I will link down below if you're interested in learning more. I hope you enjoyed the first episode of Owner Explains. The next episode will probably be another month where I get my questions answered about UPS stores. Make sure you're subscribed so that you see that next video when it posts. And let me know in the comments, what do you think of the motel business? Are you interested in looking more into it? Do you have any follow-up questions? And also leave a comment if you have specific businesses that you think we should explore together. I'm in full learning mode and I'd be happy to go reach out to folks, summarize what I learned, and come back and share my notes with you. I hope you're having a wonderful day and I will talk to you next week. Bye!